every night.
Oh, that's cute.
And on the nights that I'm like, I'm not gonna do it, Matt like holds me to it. He's like,
You guys are such a cute couple.
I know we
We're live.
Love,
Okay.
true love.
So, what do we want to talk about first?
Oh, is it recording?
Yeah.
Oh, it recorded me singing about true love.
Joy will appreciate it.
Hello, Joy.
So,
I'm Allie, I'm C.
I'm Nicole. I'm A.
I'm Teddy, I'm B.
I'm Alex, I think I'm D. Yep, that's what's
Yeah,
what's
that's
up, D.
So, I guess we want to talk about, I think that the most interesting thing to me this week was the video of the Cambodian. Alex and I already had a whole talk about this today. About all the Cambodian people talking about, how they don't know the language that their parents speak and not disconnect. And then also, there's a bunch of other almost random stories that were in there.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts about that.
I thought it was interesting too, and just how different an experience that is. I'm very close with my parents and with my grandparents as well, and so that's weird for me to think about not being. My portion of it was talking about there was around minute 9. They're talking about love languages and how in Cambodian families, it's common for parents to show that they care about their kid by pushing them, especially by comparing them to their siblings or to their peers and that kind of thing. And I was kind of thinking about that, if I was a teacher observing that in my students and how they were interacting with their parents, I would be kind of appalled if I heard a parent that was like, you're not doing this like so-and-so is doing it in the class, to overhear any sort of interaction like that is so contrary to the way that I was raised or my ideas about what it means to express love to people, that I think I would have a very visceral reaction negatively towards that. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of helpful for me to hear about what that experience is like, so that I wouldn't just, because I was talking about how I would equate that with bad parenting if I hadn't known it to be a cultural difference.
Well, I was thinking about because I read that part of your post, I was thinking about it for a while, and I guess in the video, the kid that said that he has that interaction with his parents every once in a while about them comparing him to others, it's, he didn't seem okay with it either, he seemed very hurt by it, and I was wondering if that's something that maybe he has that reaction to it and is hurt by it because he's grown up here and is kind of accustomed to our just ways of interacting and expressing care for our family and stuff like that. So I wonder if maybe if he had grown up in Cambodia with his family, maybe he wouldn't be as hurt by that as he is.
Yeah, I wondered about that too, if it's a result of his acculturation in America or if it would be the same.
Yeah.
If that's is that how do kids have a problem with that if they're just raised in Cambodia? Mm-hmm. And if so, then why wouldn't they change that in their own parenting style?
Because I can't imagine that would, well, I can't imagine I would feel good about that anyways, but also I feel it's not as easy to just say I don't like, my parents did this, I don't like, I'm going to change it. I feel we hear a lot, we teach the way we were taught, and I think that's the same with parenting. It's generally we parent the way we were parented.
Well, I guess I'm just kind of wondering, with this video, what was kind of the overall, message? Was it just informing us on some of the struggles that some families have? Or was it you need to start including Cambodian style and culture into your classroom? And because I kind of got the sense of when the older people were talking about or when he was saying well, you're in America, so you're seeing English signs everywhere, you're seeing English this and English that. It's well, yeah, but what does that mean that we do? Are we supposed to have is this where we're
adding multiple languages into our classroom? Like, is this like, what are we supposed to do at this point? Like, are we just supposed to be aware of it, or are we actually supposed to do something about it?
I think how I kind of interpreted the purpose of it, I guess, would not necessarily be as much to tell teachers, hey, this is what you need to do about this, but sort of, I was thinking of it in the framework of the chapter 4 that was talking about how students, culturally and linguistically diverse students that come into our classrooms, teachers often are very quick to assess and try to figure out what's going on without really considering the other complexities that are going on in that child's life, is as far as adapting to the culture as a whole. We often think about like the academic challenges that they're facing and how their languages, like just speaking a different language complicates some of the academic spheres without thinking about sort of those, how they're interrelations with other people, or sort of this like interpersonal, or not internal processing and adaptation is going for them in the complexity of that process. So I kind of was thinking of it in that framework of like awareness for the teachers, to get them to think about what else is going on in the lives of these students and that you don't necessarily see in the classroom, those things outside of school that are the extra challenges that they bring, that are not specifically academic but just complicate what's happening in a classroom.
Yeah, because as I was watching the video, I just like got more and more angry, like, well, what do you expect me to do about this? So yeah, just being aware of it, I can definitely, I pinpointed that.
And
but
maybe like also, you know, we hear a lot that like, you know, teachers getting annoyed about parents not being involved in their children's education or being involved when they're doing homework and all this kind of stuff. And so like if you're aware of that happening, then you also know like potentially why parents aren't helping them with homework or aren't coming to conferences or that kind of stuff if they don't even speak the same language.
Yeah, and I think that ties in the importance of how the assessment book was talking about informal assessment of acculturation with home visits. And like making a home visit and really making that effort to understand where the student is coming from and sort of like, I guess like what they need at home and like what's expected of them at home and what their home life is like, and that'll transfer over into what they need in the classroom. And so that'll help you, I don't know, like sort of see the whole child.
I kind of wanted to talk about that too, though, about home visits, because I feel like it's something we've been hearing and reading a lot about. I've never once actually heard of a teacher going to a child's home for like a home visit. None of my teachers ever in my life suggested such a thing. You know, I don't, like, I know plenty of teachers that don't do that. You know, I have like 10 different teachers in my family that have never once mentioned going to a child's home for a home visit. I just feel like, I guess I was wondering if it's something that like, you know, only like very rare exceptional teachers do, or if it's like something that's more common with ELL students in your classroom and their families, or, you know, the only time I've ever heard of it is like with the extremely like special needs child, you know, and in that situation with their like paras. But that's the only time I've ever heard of it, so I guess I wanted to know your thoughts on that too.
the teacher that did home visits for the time I was job shadowing her, it wasn't any ELL. I mean, it was a title. It was Cordata, or not Cordata, the other C one, Carl Kosher. But that's not. It wasn't because of ELL or anything like that. She was just very involved with all of them and in the community because her son was kind of playing sports with them as well. But she would always go to like their community events, and you would always hear the kids be like, "Oh, and Mrs. Dominguez was over at this time this weekend," or that kind of thing. And she was just, you could see like the kids just kind of light up with knowing that she cares and everything. You could see that bond just being so much more solid and just a lot stronger, as opposed to multiple other teachers and sources that I've seen that have not done home visits.
My biggest worry with home visit is that some parents will see it as like, I'm trying to think of the right words, but like they'll see it as like disrupting their personal space, or like invading their boundaries or something like that, because home can be like a very personal place and like I don't know.
I don't see that at all. I see the collaboration. Like, I mean, obviously you don't just show up like, oh, I'm your son's teacher for this next coming year. This is the first time I'm meeting you. So obviously you have that initial collaboration right off the bat with the student and the parents during the parent-student-teacher conferences before school starts. And then you set up a home visit, and at that point, it's up to that family to invite you into their home or not.
That's a good point.
Okay, that's what I was wondering, like the logistics of it.
Yeah.
Is it like, does the teacher reach out to the family, or does the family reach out to the teacher and say like, hey, do you want to come to our home? Is that usually what happens for home visits? Or is it usually like, does the teacher send home a letter and say, hey, everybody, come back over sometime?
I'm hungry.
I don't make enough money, so I'm going to stop at your houses on a strict schedule. No, I'm just kidding. Did you know any of the logistics of that in that teacher you were working with?
I don't know any of the logistics. However, it got to a point where it was so casual to the point where like, oh yeah, she stopped by for just a few minutes here. But from what I could tell or see, I mean, I could ask her I could text her if you guys wanted me to, but it was like a showed her face on the community with the soccer and everything, and then kind of used that as a crutch of like, oh, well, like inviting you over to their house first or that kind of thing, depending on the mood of the family and the connection of the family that you have with them. If it isn't that big of a connection, my instinct would be to invite them over to my house first. Or to, because you don't want to just be like, invite me over.
Yeah.
So I guess I would kind of be like inviting them over to my house first, or just kind of seeing where they're at with that.
I don't know if I'd be comfortable with inviting families over to my house as a teacher. I just think that like, I feel like as teachers we're expected to hold such like a professional like appearance, like that's just so, I don't know, I feel like, I guess, like separate even, like I don't, like growing up I never knew anything about my teachers' personal lives at all, like it wasn't supposed to be shared at all.
See, you're supposed to like take that gap away. That's what home visits are about, is taking that gap away, is them seeing you as a person and you seeing them as a person, not just a
well, I feel like
authority figure.
What I've been hearing so far is like it's really one-sided, so I've never even heard of that even brought up of like inviting families to your house. You know? And I guess it, you know, I see what you're saying. I feel like if depending on the relationship that could make sense, but I feel like that I'd be hesitant to do that. Like it sounds kind of scary.
Well, and like working in the YMCA for so long, and they ingrain in you child abuse prevention techniques, and they're like, and taking this class and like learning about things like home visits, it's sort of like breaking away that gap, and like it's making me realize that the Y wasn't doing really a good thing when they were like, you have to build this gap so like you can protect yourself from being accused of child abuse, and like so that you can protect the child.
Very
and like
real problem.
I mean, it is a very real problem, and so it's like I worry that if there starts to be something like where it becomes common for teachers to invite families over to their house, like there might be some teachers out there who take advantage of it in a very bad way. And so I don't know, like it's also just like what the Y has ingrained in me, unfortunately, and it's like I'm still learning about like home visits and like how like the awesome benefits of it. And so
do you guys want to create that to be a muddy question?
Yeah, I was thinking of writing that down.
10
So what about home visits, or about
Like, how do you initiate home visits?
Yeah.
And I think, because I was kind of thinking the same thing as you, where there is part of me that like wants to have an air of caution with that. I don't know if that's just because of that's how my teachers were, or what, but yeah, just to maintain some security too, like, you know, because there's laws of like high school teachers can't be Facebook friends with their students.
Yeah, that's
so
stuff.
these certain things of like, there's these certain limitations that you have to have on things just for safety and security reasons for your students. And so what are there any rules about like home visits? What does that look like? What would be the difference in you going to someone's house versus them
Who
going to
was
you?
it that was saying that there was that they have their students do a home visit? Was that Jessica? Or was that Joy?
Jessica brought
Was
up
it
home
Joy?
visits.
She said that she had her students do
think so.
home visits, right?
Yeah, and at the university she used to work at.
Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
And she said that they were scared to death, but afterwards
The families
she
were
said
like
that
so
they
welcoming.
well yeah, so that it was just a complete myth about like all of her anxieties and everything.
I also just think that another one of my sorry, I have a lot of opinions about this. As far as like inviting people to your house, and maybe it's just because of where I grew up and where I'm from, but another thing that scares me about that is, you know, you're talking about families that you don't know at all, and you're just trying to like build relationship with them, but like that's a lot of strangers to be bringing into your house.
Yeah.
Where potentially, you know, people could come back to break in, and you don't want to like have those negative assumptions about people, but also like, you know, that's something that I've, you know, my house in Tacoma has been broken into like handful of times at least, you know, since I've been a kid. Like that's something that very real that happens with people even that I know fairly well, you know, or that you think you know fairly well.
Well,
Yeah,
it
and
depends
so-
on your relationship with the family and your understanding of the family.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
I'm
I'm
not gonna
I'm looking at that
some
too.
sketchy ass person at my house.
Well,
Yeah.
even just like people that don't seem super sketchy, you know, like you can never really know who to trust. And so I think that like, you know, I just think that me going to a family's house is different than
Yeah.
me inviting my
Yeah,
you know,
because I was
to
thinking
my
the same
house.
thing when I was thinking about like what regulations there are and just like, or what if, is it safe for all of your students and families to know where you live? Like, what if because then all your students know if you're going to be on vacation for a couple days or something. And so
Yeah.
all those people know your house is
Yeah.
unattended.
They go
Or,
tell
like,
all of their
What
families
if
that my
you
teacher's out for
have
3 days.
something and you make a parent angry about something and that parent has a history of like violence or something, you know, like
Yeah.
those backgrounds with outside of just your students and the other people or an older sibling or something that you know, like just for the security of the teacher, that would make me a little nervous. So I'm with you there. So I'm curious. I'd be curious to know like real world experiences for teachers. What
I do think a good like
Homes.
middle ground though, like if a family isn't inviting you to their house or like you don't know how to like initiate that, I feel like a good at least stepping stone for that is just like, you know, community events like you said, going
Yeah.
to their sporting events, their, you know, musical rehearsals, their, you know, if you're talking about like family giant barbecues in parks or like powwows or like things like that. Church events even
Public
sometimes.
things.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like that's a good stepping stone, and like if you really can't make any connection with the family, I feel like I don't know. But also if you can't make a connection, I was going to say like if you can't make a connection with the family, then like inviting them over to your house might be like a final last resort. But then I'm also like if you can't make a connection with the family, I wouldn't necessarily know that I would want them over at my house. If like we can't make a connection, we're not building that relationship or trust, and brings in all the other like security aspects that you were talking about. But
So, I mean, you also want to be careful not to assume, you know, if you have a difficult time communicating with a family, that doesn't mean that they're like
Bad
awful
people.
people.
Oh,
or
yeah,
something, you know,
obviously.
like, it could be scheduling, it could be so many things, you know. So careful in our assumptions of that too. But yeah, I see what you're doing. It's like, if the reason is because there's some, I don't know, like there's something
lack
feels
of
off, then
communication
listen
and
to that,
stuff.
you know, yeah.
I also wanted to talk about so my question for the video was about that kid who was accused of having a gun.
Yeah, I saw that on your post as I was reading it today and wanted to look back at that and didn't.
You printed out all of our posts.
I did. It's easier for me.
No, I love it. I've never seen anyone do that before.
So the way she phrased the question was basically like, what would I have done differently than what his school did? And I don't necessarily think that I would have done anything differently, because especially like today, you know, like gun safety is such a real thing that I feel like no matter how little merit an accusation like that has, you have to look into every single one and take every single one seriously. you know, and they made it seem in the video like it was so appalling that like, you know, he was brought in for questioning even though like it was just one girl's word. But I'm like, yeah, you know, I don't care whose word it is, you know, it could be any kid's word, and you know, you have to investigate that, especially today.
yeah.
Well, I think they were
And I was-
more so upset about the parents not being there, the fact that he's underage.
So
Yeah, that was the impression I got.
and I guess I was thinking about this, and I didn't want to write this in my post, but like I think anytime I ever got in trouble in school, my parents were never there when I was questioned by the school, ever. And my parents speak English, you know, but I think that the school purposely wanted maybe also to just like get those issues resolved quickly and didn't want to have to like wait for my parents to come and call them. My parents are at work, they're gonna have to like, you know, call out and all that kind
And
of
would
stuff.
have been turns out to be easy resolution.
Yeah, just to deal with it with the student. And then also I think
But is
maybe
the school different
my-
than the police though?
the police weren't there in the I don't think he said the police were there in the video. I think he said it was the school. It was like the principal and that
thought
girl's
he-
mom.
I thought he said the police.
Oh, I don't think so. Do you guys know?
I don't
I
remember.
don't think so.
I think he just said it was the principal and then the girl who accused him, her mom was there.
Okay.
I think that
Um,
also was where the he was upset about it was not just like, oh, I don't think he was saying my parents should be here whenever I get in trouble. I have the right for that. It was that the other girl's parents were there, but not his.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well,
And
was
that
it-
was the difference. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Versus just like, oh, my mom needs to come to school every time I am tardy to class or something, you know?
Yeah.
But when it's a different treatment between two students in the same situation, not the same,
Yeah.
but you know what I mean?
Well, I guess, but it's not like that girl's. It didn't sound as if to me like that girl's mom was invited there. Like it sounded like the girl didn't even tell on it that goes to school with him. It sounded like she told her mom. Her mom
Yeah.
came and confronted the school about it.
Mhm.
In which case, you know, it's not like she was invited to come in. It's like she had
Right.
been there and made the accusation herself.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I was a little hesitant about that part because Joy made it sound like, you know, it was so awful and that there was something different that should be done, but I guess I don't really know what because
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that maybe I agree that you know, his parents should at least bare minimum be brought in later and have like some kind of meeting with the translator and talk to about what happened. But I think in the moment, like I think that's a common thing for schools to do is to interview the kid without the
Yeah.
parent there.
Well, and one thing that I would take into account before, if I were like working with the issue with the child, parents have a tendency to only believe the best in their kid.
Mm-hmm.
And like I've had a lot of instances where I go and I talk to a parent about what happened like at the YMCA today, and they're like, oh well, he's never done that. Like, are you sure? Like, well, what did the other kid do to start it? And like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And they just like they really try to like get I don't know, like get their voice heard so that they can defend their child to the end of the world. But which I get, but in the moment, like you were saying, if you're trying to figure out like what happened, having the parent be there
It's
won't
causes
be
a problem.
yeah, it won't be productive.
Yeah. Because
Because
they wanted to come to the defense.
exactly.
Yeah.
And also like I don't know, like I know a lot of kids who would be less likely to admit something with their parent right there.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Does that answer what you're wondering about it? I think we're all kind of
I guess I'm
confused.
wondering what Joy's thinking about it then, because I don't think I would have done anything differently.
I
Honestly.
wonder if she
I
took
think
the
maybe, yeah.
situation more like I did, where like
Like police.
yeah, like there was a little bit more involved or a little bit less involved.
Yeah, maybe.
Like maybe we just have different opinions as to what the situation was that was happening.
He was very vague explaining it too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seemed like he didn't really remember the whole
Yeah.
story, or maybe it was
Well, he
intentional.
said he was like
leaving
in
things
what,
out.
fifth grade.
Yeah. So it wasn't super clear what he was saying happened.
Yeah. Are you writing a Betty question about it?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna ask Joy what she thinks should have been done.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
I guess one thing about it that I guess I forgot about this. that they did ask him if he was in a gang. That is a really interesting question because I don't think I wonder if that was part of the accusation, like something that he had said that caused that question, or if that was something they assumed based on the fact that they thought he might have a gun and he was a person of color.
I think that's
That
hard
is
is
an
that like
interesting thing too.
we don't have
Yeah.
any context.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that's the hard part is that like we just have he said, she said. And
Yeah.
like we don't know, maybe he did say something where she might think that he's in a gang. Or,
Yeah,
like,
because he
maybe-
didn't say what he said.
Right,
so-
exactly. So like
yeah.
maybe he did say something that was a little off that he might not think was off, but you see a girl who's like, oh, I don't know.
Yeah, without the context, like just purely like they asked if he was in a gang, like that's not okay because that's making assumptions based on the fact that he's a person of color. But like there could be more context into why they asked that question. But like purely from the way that I saw it watching the video with like the little information that was given, that doesn't seem like an okay question to ask.
Yeah. I feel like that whole thing was just not really not sufficient, you know.
Yeah, which is why, sorry, Joy, that it was
It was
kind of
not
a
a
poor question
Great question, yeah.
because there's not enough
Yeah.
context to say like this is what should have been done.
Or maybe
Yeah,
that's why
yeah.
she wanted it to be a question because now we're talking about it forever.
Well, now it's a muddy question.
And have reached the conclusion that we still don't know.
Or reached the conclusion that I wouldn't necessarily have done anything differently.
Yeah.
Depending on what happened.
Maybe that's all
So-
she wanted.
Maybe. Well,
Yes. So what else was there? I'm so sick of talking about the other video.
Oh, I was curious your guys' thoughts. One of you talked about bringing in experts on culture, not experts, people from different cultural groups. Okay, let me back up. Context here. Culturally sustaining pedagogy, the article about that. And she asked, like, what can you do in your classroom to make sure that you're not just essentializing cultures? And you were talking about bringing in people from the cultures and having them speak about a culture at a time. And then you were talking about avoiding cultural nights and not focusing on one culture at a time. And I thought that was interesting because you did like caveat it with like bringing in people from other cultures too, you know, so that they can see this is not like a only, or I don't remember exactly how you put it, but do you guys remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So I'm curious what you guys think, just as I was thinking about that, when we're bringing in different cultures into the classroom and making sure that we have this culturally relevant and culturally sustaining pedagogy, when is it appropriate to focus specifically on one culture at a time and teach about that culture? When is that detrimental and essentializing that culture, and when is it helpful because it's bringing in this kind of culture? You know what I mean?
I don't know.
I mean, like, I'm
That's why I want to
honestly-
talk about it because I don't know either. I'm not like waiting for you to tell me the answer I want to hear.
Yeah. I mean, like, culturally sustaining pedagogy is something that I'm still, like, trying to figure out. But the idea that I got from it is not, like, and bringing in essentialism where you just talk about, like, the basics of each culture and, like, the main things and, like, the history and sort of, like, compartmentalizing it. Like avoiding that was sort of the idea that I got from culturally sustaining pedagogy. And so that's why like cultural nights, I didn't say like, I don't know, I was saying like be careful of them just because the way that I see it or like the way that it's been structured in the past, it's been like, oh, this culture is over here. If you're from like this continent, set up your little stand right over here. Or like if you're from this continent. And one like word that I caught onto in that article was like cultural fluidity and like making a connection between cultures. And so I think that like if you find a way to do that with cultural nights, then that's great. And like I think honestly like your question about like when is it okay to do one certain culture, I think like you're going to need to really get in depth with that culture, but like find a way to connect it to something else. But like it's still something I'm trying to figure out, so I'm not completely sure, but that's just my initial idea.
I think I agree with that.
Yeah, I think like you're kind of getting at the idea. The fluidity reminds me of like intersectionality, sort of
Yeah.
teaching about culture with the framework of the intersections that we have between other cultures
Mhm.
that isn't necessarily taught, even though you're focusing on one thing, it's not taught entirely in isolation. Stumbling on my words.
Yeah.
And the reason
I
why
don't
I'm
know.
saying to bring experts, and I'm saying experts because I'm not saying one person can stand hold for the entire culture. So I'm saying experts as in just people who know the culture or they're part of the culture, is because I'm one person. There's how many cultures out there? And I don't want to pretend that I know somebody else's culture, and I don't want to sit there and like try and teach somebody else's culture to them when I have no idea what the F I'm talking about. So that's why I'm saying that you need to bring in other people that will be able to do that better. Because like in our Native American class that we're taking right now, they're talking about how the elders are the ones that we need to learn from, and about how they like know, they've had so much experience that they basically know more than we do, and we need to learn from them. And I'm taking that, I agree, you know, like as I have gotten older, I feel like there are things that I can look back on and be like, wow, I really didn't know what I was doing. I should have listened to the person who was telling me that was older what I was doing. And just the fact of, I don't know shit when it comes to different cultures, and to accept that and to fix that. And I'm sure that after I have a few experts come in and that kind of thing, when like after a few years of the same repetitive things, I could probably teach those, but I don't feel like I would be giving it the respect it deserves by doing that.
I agree. I think also like kind of with what you were saying about cultural fluidity, it's, you know, not just connecting the cultures to each other, but like, you know, I think we talked a lot about how like you want to include all the cultures in your classroom, and a good way to do that is by having the students from those cultures like talk about it. But you know, their experience in that culture is very different from their parents' experience, which is different from their neighbor's experience, which is different from the experience of this person like way over here, you know. And so I think like, you know, having your child talk about their experience, their family's experience, but bringing in other people from the culture too that have had different experiences, maybe you're older and or like, you know, are from a different city or like whatever, because like, you know, cultures not only change a lot over time but change a lot over space.
I think I touched base on that by saying like multiple people from one culture.
And the thing that I like about your idea of bringing in experts, and like how you were saying like it made you realize you didn't know shit about some things, and like there were people that you should have listened to. And I think that that's an important lesson that kids might need to learn, is like there are some times where I don't know everything, and there are some times where I just need to shut up and listen because this person can teach me a lot. And so like, I don't know, yeah, sort of that idea of like it's another underlying lesson that they could learn.
I'm sure that who's the penis envy dude?
What?
Who's the penis envy? The guy who created all the penis envy stuff.
What are you talking
It's
about?
It's a psychologist.
Is that a funny question?
The psychologist who created penis envy is like one of the most famous psychologists. I can't think of his name right now.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. But
What?
who created it?
Who created the id and the ego? And I was just gonna say I don't think the kids' egos will allow that, but I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
What is his
I
name?
thought you were talking about like some.
It's like one of the most famous
Freud?
psychologists in the world.
Is it
Freud.
Freudian?
Freud, thank you.
Okay.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, penis envy and Freudian psychosexual development.
Yep.
Okay.
But he also-
as
but
far as like
it was also, like-
masculinity.
Well, just the
comparison,
fact that the
like,
kids are gonna be able to sit there and understand that they don't know everything,
Yeah.
their developmental brain will not allow that.
Yeah, that's rough.
I'm thinking too,
Like
just
in that
like,
teenage moment.
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking about more so in that teenage moment
Mm-hmm.
when their ego is taking over their id.
I'm thinking, just practically speaking, too, like, I like this idea too of having people come in, you know, like, and we're gonna have so many different cultures represented in a classroom depending on where you are. And having people come in, and insiders is the word I would use to talk about that culture.
Insiders, I like that.
But like practically speaking, what do you cut out from your content to have time
Right.
to bring out to bring those people in?
Do we need to get
Or,
our
like,
capes out
how do
again?
you incorporate-
There's so many
How,
practicalities.
you know, like, are you gonna cut out reading workshop today? And, or how can you incorporate that into like a writing unit and have them write something about someone that comes in, or have them then I don't know, end up trying to do some sort of
Yeah.
connecting
Whoever said
it
this
into the
job was easy
content
is that.
somehow, so it's not just like twice a week we take an hour to hear from a random person,
Right.
and
Yeah.
then that's 2 hours a week is a lot for content, you know. So
Yeah.
Well, I think this is kind of where you can like connect it in. So what I would do is have one of the books that we got from Desiree, Dr. Cueto. She's very, very stingy. Multicultural books. You like, I can read a book. That's totally fine with me. I can do that. And then maybe that'll spark, like, so then you're teaching how to inquire about a book. So then you start thinking about questions about a book. And then maybe they write letters to the author of the book. Or maybe they write questions that they have for somebody about that culture of the book. Or maybe they write something that they know about the culture from the book. You know, like just kind of do that. So there's moments where we can do that. But then also at the same time, like you said, that read aloud takes away from read aloud that you were thinking about doing for science, or like something that ties in writing with your reading. So it's
Well, social studies is part of the curriculum just as much as science is, though, you know.
Yeah.
yeah.
So like, I mean, you know, you would do all of it.
Yeah. Do all of
Give
it.
it time.
Do
Yeah.
everything. Make time.
While you
Move into the
give the kids
classroom.
brain breaks, while you take
Yeah.
them to PE, while you include
Oh,
PE in
man.
your lessons, while you include music in your lessons.
And then you take them
You
to
just have
music
to
and
have
then
a
lunch.
different person walk them through the hall every time they're like going to lunch or something that can talk about their culture.
There you
as they're
go.
walking.
Do you want to come into school for 5 minutes and just walk my kids somewhere?
And talk to them.
You do that from 10 to 10:05, and then also from 12:30 to 12:35.
No, it's actually 12:32 and 30 seconds. You have to be in the class by that 30-second mark.
You know, those people that say that we should have year-round school, they're not reaching high enough. We need to have like 24-hour school just every day.
We need to learn in nature.
Oh my
Our
gosh!
Native American class. We're
No.
gonna learn through the buffalo.
Learn through the
Yeah, I can do
trees.
it.
Just have a buffalo.
Learn through the trees and the needles, and I didn't know you could eat needles.
Oh yeah.
Nettles.
Nettles.
Okay.
Not needles.
Not needles, metals.
Nettles.
Yeah, the
Like
sting.
a steam level?
Oh, it's a stinging nettle, not a stinging needle.
It's a stinging nettle.
Metals.
Oh, that's
Well,
not for
I thought it
you
was-
use them for like tea and like medicinal.
I thought it was-
like
Isn't it a
I don't know how
stinging
it's
needle
used.
because it
It's a
feels like
stinging
needles?
a nettle.
Oh.
Nettle.
Well, fine.
Nettle.
All right, where are we at here?
I still think you're gonna eat them, regardless of what they're called.
We're at 34 minutes right now.
You can eat anything.
As long as it's from nature.
You can eat anything.
I used to find
once.
huckleberries in the backyard of my house all the time and eat them. It tasted so good.
My little cousin used to eat spiders all the time. It was really gross.
No, I said huckleberries.
Yeah. I said spiders.
Spiders. My dog eats bees.
That's funny.
My dog eats kitchen chairs as of yesterday.
Oh, lovely.
Oh yeah. Oh, I got a call from my dad that my dog was eating a pen.
Oh, did you tell you that?
Oh no, I called him because I saw a puppy on campus, so I called him to ask about my puppy.
Nice.
Do you have any more questions about what's going on?
What do you mean?
Theodora Tolby, can you please unlock your computer?
Oh.
You got Theodora.
I was reading her name on her computer.
I thought it was interesting. Just while I was reading this chapter, I actually really enjoyed the first half of it a lot, which was funny. Because I was thinking about.
Did you enjoy it, Teddy?
It was hard to read.
No, yeah, usually stuff is, but
Oh.
this one, I think I was thinking about it and I was like, dude, I feel like I've read this stuff so many times. And then started thinking about it for some reason in terms of like my life experience and I don't know, thinking about it in a sort of a new framework of just like I grew up in a fairly close conservative Christian community. And that's no longer something that I necessarily am a part of in the same way. Certain things that I still hold to, certain things that I just don't. And was thinking about like my experience kind of coming from that community and then like moving up to Bellingham and being at Western and being exposed to new ideas and having very much this sort of I had never thought about it before in terms of being in a new culture because in a lot of ways it's still racially and socioeconomically similar to the area I grew up in and climate wise. So I hadn't thought about like my experience moving from one culture to another. And yeah, as I was talking about this, a lot of the things that they were talking about, the students experiencing, I was like, dude, I feel like I've been experiencing that the last 2 years and just these different things that they have. And then there's, you know, like this, students can often will have a period where they're very upset at their parents for having this other culture and trying to get them to be a part of their primary culture when they just want to accommodate to this new culture. And yeah, getting mad at the first culture, I guess you could say. And yeah, thinking about that and like I think I've thought a lot of this as being very much more applicable to students that are like culturally and linguistically diverse coming into our schools, especially like for people of color. And so for me, I've never thought about this sort of acculturation process and applied it to myself before because I'm like, oh well, I haven't moved to a place where I'm a person not of color going into a place of color or something like that. So yeah, that was an interesting experience for me. I don't know if you guys have ever, I was curious to know if you ever feel like you've experienced sort of a culture shock or places where you've had to accommodate to a new culture that kind of fit some of the framework of some of the things that these students were experiencing, or if that was just me.
Well, one of the only places that I felt like a minority was in my service learning project for, oh gosh, what class code was that? 310, the education, culture, and equity. I was at the Nooksack Indian Reservation and working with kids there after school.
I did that too for my service.
Yeah, and like I would notice kids that would look at me and like actually look and do a double take, and just because of how I look, and it was sort of just like I don't know, kind of humbling, and you're just like okay. But it's also interesting how you were talking about how kids can sometimes get like frustrated with their parents for having a different culture, and like I obviously my parents and I come from the same culture, but I think a way that I find myself relating to that is like generation, because like their generation has different ideas than mine, and especially after coming to Western and getting some more progressive ideas, it's not that they're not progressive, but they're things that we've actually like kind of argued about. And so like it's on a much smaller scale compared to what these kids are dealing with, but sort of a way that I can begin to think about it.
For me,
Yeah.
it was going to South Africa.
Mm.
Just feel all of the attention on us in a negative way. I wouldn't say negative, just not the best way.
I'm thinking more like a not necessarily a trip, because I feel like trips are definitely really eye-opening in that way of sort of.
I'm sorry, I was going
experiencing
over
life
what
as
your
a
question
minority.
was.
Oh, I meant more like a time where you've had to assimilate, like whenever you've been acculturated to a new culture, so like living in that culture. You know, because I think traveling is a really good experience, but it's also very brief.
Yeah.
So you don't have to actually figure out what it's like for you to live in that culture as much. Well, I don't know. How long were you there?
3 weeks.
Okay.
2 weeks.
But sorry, I didn't mean to like
No,
cut
no,
you
no,
off.
no.
Tell me
No,
about
I
what you were
Chris,
going to say.
the story. I guess the only time, which isn't a big deal, it's just a very minority thing, was when we moved here from Wisconsin. We moved in the middle of February, and my parents almost got CPS called on them because we were out in the middle of February in shorts and t-shirt. Because in Wisconsin, in the middle of February, it's negative something degrees.
Yeah.
So we come here when it's, oh my god, is that a bird?
Yes.
It's a seagull.
I thought he was coming through.
When here it is a, what, 40 degree, 40 degree weather.
Yeah.
We were having the time of our lives playing in the snow in shorts and t-shirts. Like, it was great. This much snow, where we came from like 10 feet of snow. So that was the only time. Other than that, I've just been living my nice Bellingham life.
Sorry, I didn't mean to like cut you off from what you're talking about.
No,
With
I'm glad
the-
you did.
Yeah, just because I think like I was thinking about that a little bit too, because I know I had a similar experience like I talked
Mhm.
about in
Yeah.
Italy.
Yeah.
But that was different for me. I think I wouldn't want to relate that to what it's like for students to have to move,
Right.
and live, and
Yes.
adapt to an entirely.
I
new
was more
culture.
so just thinking that initial. I was thinking more
Still
so
the culture
the
shock.
cultural shock
Yeah.
part of it, of that
For sure.
initial of like coming into the classroom for the first time.
Mhm.
That was kind of my take on it. But yeah,
Sure.
no, I haven't really
Mhm.
experienced any of that. Granted, I've lived in Bellingham for 20 years, so that's probably why.
Well, any other thoughts on stuff?
I just was kind of reading the whole situation with, I don't know how to say its name.
The
Oh,
girl that was dressed
Yeah.
in the.
Yeah,
Oh, I thought that was.
I don't remember how to say her name, but I don't know. I mean, I understand that that
Something like that.
scenario can be realistic, but at the same time, I really just want to be like, teacher, like, really? Are you for serious right now? What is it, like Miss Carter or something?
Miss Cantu and Nishida.
Yeah, that one. I was like, are you serious? Come on.
Get with the times.
Like, are you being real right now?
Are you for serious?
Like, can you please not? Can you just be a normal human being? That's what I think, like, is kind of crazy about a lot of this stuff, is that for me, and I can only speak for me because I don't know of anybody else, a lot of it's just common sense.
Mm-hmm.
Be a nice, genuine person, and you'll
Show
do
that
just
you
fine.
Show that you care. Make an effort.
Yeah, don't judge and be happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't worry. Be happy now. Get to know people. Love people.
Yeah.
Move on in life.
I was just thinking, I don't know if this is really relevant, but we just had our like Native American class where I was watching this movie of these teenagers.
That's why I'm like, get over it,
That was
people.
so freaking funny. They're the funniest boys ever. But at one point they were filming a documentary as like an environmental justice kind of thing. And at one point at the end they were filming. It seemed like maybe one of the elders or maybe like one of their grandfathers.
It was one of the kids.
Yeah, and he started talking about the kids started talking about the movie they're making, and his grandfather kind of interrupted him and was like, "Yeah, it's just like back in my day when I was deployed and went to
Germany for World War II.
yeah Germany for World War II, and he was like, and I fought in this war, and when I was your age, I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't go to World War II until I was like 22 or something like that, and like, or maybe that was the other guy, but you know what I'm saying, but he was to relate to what the boys were doing, but but he did it in a really like roundabout way that almost I just caught myself like judging in my head too, just because of like my experiences with just like older people in general. I think that I've only had like 2 people in my family really get to that age before. Like, I feel like everyone in my family's died pretty young, and so I've only experienced that kind of age with 2 people in my family, and I think my whole family's had a very negative view about them in general, and kind of just rolls her eyes and it's just like whatever, and like you're just gonna like you're making this way too complicated, like I'm gonna tell you what we're doing. And I think that a lot of the old people in my family have just been really dismissed, and so I think that that's the view that I've had, and so I caught myself like thinking about that old man, I was like, that's not even what they're talking about. You know, I was like, it's such a typical like old person thing to do to like, you know, interrupt him, be like, you know what, like back in my day in World War II, and I'm like, that's not what this is about. But then I'm like, I noticed that I did that in my head, and I just stopped. I was like, no, wait, it's the whole point of this, you know, about this class is about like elders and like knowledge and stuff like that. And I guess my point is just that like, you know, I feel like I'm a non-judgmental person, but also like I still have things like that, you know, where I do catch myself making those judgments in my head.
You'll learn about that in a Genesis class. It is implicit bias.
Yeah.
Been learning about it for
That's
years,
very true,
so
actually.
it's not that I, you know, haven't heard about it. I've been learning.
But you mean
so.
that's not what your degree is?
But you know, it's easy to say that like, you know, just don't judge people and be nice. But like I think it's you know, not necessarily that simple for every situation, you know.
It's interesting I took the video that way. I saw it as him encouraging them to travel and do this because he was saying that like that's where he got to learn how other people do things and learn another side of things and learn like another reality of life.
Oh, it was about their trip to DC.
Yeah.
Was what he was saying. Like, it's great that you guys got to go to DC and see that because, you know. But I guess my thought was them going to DC and traveling there just to see another, you know, like area wasn't the point of the story. They were trying to tell them about the movie and about how they got to interview the, you know, Washington State like senator and all this stuff. But like that's not really, you know, they weren't talking to him about the fact that they got to go travel somewhere. Like they were trying to tell him about their interview with the senator, and he like kind of cut them off. It was like, it's great that you guys get to go to this other place because I got to do that in World War II. But I
saw it as
had a very
saying, like,
negative, but it's my acculturation, right?
Yeah.
You know?
But I just think it's
Yeah.
funny because I took it as him encouraging them to learn more about it because they got to see the politics side of what they were doing. So he was encouraging them to continue to travel and stuff and see other people's side of view or point of view because the politics is never easy to just, you know, like to get through. So that's really funny. That's really interesting.
Yeah. So
Okay, I think we've learned everything that we can possibly learn. I think I'm ready to go teach.
Well, I've got some medication.